Hey everybody, Professor Steins here, and this video is just going to kind of illuminate some of the issues that some students have when they first start out doing HTML and CSS and kind of trying to write their website. So first things first, don't get intimidated. You know, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of ways to get carried away with it, but just keep plugging forward and do the best you can, and I'll see that, and you'll do well in the course if you do that and you stay on schedule. So even if you feel like you're not doing great, or as long as you kind of keep showing me you're trying and working through the validator and implementing the techniques, there's a lot of leeway and a lot of free room to explore. So just don't get discouraged. Just keep going is basically the point. So what I've done is the first few assignments, people have a little bit of trouble getting started. So I've kind of collected 6 samples from the course. I've tried to remove any names to protect the innocent, and we're just going to kind of bump through and talk about, some of the things that we can do to kind of, get this website back on track, or kind of make something work the way we expect it to work, or even just kind of dig through a little bit of some of the common problems that happen and some of the ways that we can debug that. So in sample 0 that I have here, we have our 2 files that are in the same folder together, and they look pretty good. So we should be able to just kind of either double click on it to open in our browser, or maybe we have to go to open with and open with browser. And then we could edit the CSS files too. So you can do kind of edit with Notepad++, or if you choose one at a time, you can go with the open with and get it into your editor of choice. Now, mine doesn't happen to be here. You might have to choose another app to find it in the list, Notepad++, or use another tool if Notepad++ isn't available to you. I also have brackets, which you could use that one as well, but just stay consistent. I'm going to stick with Notepad++. Everything is pretty much the same. The menus and stuff are really common too, so hopefully it'll work pretty well for you. So we'll open it up and we'll take a look at it, and we can see that there are some transformations occurring in the page here. We can see some italicizing here, maybe something here that looks like maybe part of HTML that's not quite there. So when we first start debugging, kind of the first thing that we need to do is check our code. So on the validator's website, validator.w3.org, under the tool here, you should be able to choose different options to check, and you can do file upload and choose that file, and you'll need to find which one you have it stored. So I created a folder for fix. There's sample 0. That's our index.html file. So we'll open it up and we'll take a look at it. And if we scroll down, it could be easy to kind of get intimidated, like, wow, there's a lot of errors here. Well, maybe there is and maybe there isn't. Maybe it's something that's not as bad as what we think it is. So what I suggest doing is to not really look at the whole page, kind of like what we just did, but just focus on the first one here. So for example, line 9, there seems to be some sort of issue with maybe an H2 tag. So when we open this up in our text editor, or you could do file open to open that file, or you could create a new file if you needed to, if you're starting off from scratch. We'll take a look, and if we look at line 10, which is actually one after line 9, so line 9, here we are, line 9, you can see that there's an H2 tag that's opened up, there's a span class with name on it, and then there's maybe supposed to be a closing tag here, a slash, to actually close that tag. So we made one change, one keystroke. Let's hit save on our file. Make sure that you save it after you've made a change, and let's go back. Remember, the first error was at line 9, so we'll check it again at line 9, and that one went away. So line 9 is no longer there. We still kind of have this warning here, which we'll fix later, but the next error that occurs is at line 10. And sometimes the error messages here can give you a little bit of help, but sometimes not. So this one might be a little bit confusing if you're trying to figure out what's going on at line 10 and what's the issue here. And I would probably suggest that this is probably from maybe following the video a little too closely when you're trying to do your work. A UL tag, an unordered list, is what creates a bulleted list, and those seem to be 1s instead of L's. So I'm just going to write over them and change the opening and the closing tag to use an L instead of a 1. And it also fixes the color coding for us. So before it was black, that could have been an indication that maybe that tag was not a valid HTML tag because it didn't do the syntax very well. So we'll go back, we'll look, that was at line 10, so we'll do choose file again and re-upload and check. And hopefully we're past that one. Now we're at line 48, which is much further down the document, so we're way down here now. And line 48, there's line 48, and this is kind of where it seems to be some sort of another issue. One of the good things is that as we keep moving down the page, as the line numbers keep going up, we're moving in the right direction. We're almost to the bottom of the document at this point, so we have a pretty good idea that we're getting pretty close. It looks like what we're trying to do is we're using list item tags. Those are typically inside of some sort of unordered list or ordered list, an OL or a UL or a OL, respectively. So up there we used a UL tag for a bulleted list. Here we'll add the tags for an ordered list, and then that way when we look at it down here, it kind of did make those little bullet items there. We might not see much of a change other than now 1 and 2 look correct. So we'll go back to the validator and we'll do a check again just to see if we're on the right track this time. And it looks like all the remaining stuff disappeared. We're just kind of left back at this laying attribute error. And not really error, it's more of a warning. I wouldn't really take off for that. But if you want to make it go away, on your HTML tag, you need to specify what language you're trying to use in your website. We're using English, so EN for English. You could look up the other character codes on W3 Schools or somewhere. And that gets us back green. So that looks pretty good for the HTML file. We managed to fix a lot of the issues there. In the CSS file, we're kind of see that we're off to the right track, and we've got a width 95% of wrapper. That should be applying it here, but that's really not, it's really hard to tell if that's actually working or not. That's not really a good property to add there, so there's no visual. It's hard to visually see that, right? So you could write your CSS out this way. This will help give you a little bit better view of kind of what it's trying to do. And don't be afraid to add colors. Everybody's kind of worried about maybe screwing up a color or something like that, or making it look bad. Just you know, I don't care if you just throw them in there. Let's see if these things work. So we formatted that rule out a little bit. Dot wrapper class equals wrapper, and we made a background color change. That looks like it should work, except maybe one too many characters in that. Should be 6. Let's refresh and see. So it didn't seem to work. Let's double check, because the CSS file is only going to apply in the HTML page if we have a link tag to include it, and that's typically up here in the head section, and we don't see that here. So we need to add that link href style equals to equal the name of the file that we want to use as our CSS file. So we'll add in our link tag, and we'll go back and we'll hit refresh, and now we can see, ooh, yeah, now it's kind of working. So style sheet's linked in, and you kind of got a class going. You know that your rules work, and from here you can kind of go down the line and start adding in other rules and stuff like that too. For example, name, if you wanted to create a class for that, that'd be dot name. Color, we got to do something purple. You can probably see that on the background pretty well, and we'll see wherever that class is implemented. So here and here. So still looks like this may be meant to be a property of something. ID Whisper. Might want to look that up and see what's going on. So that's pretty good for sample 1. It kind of illustrated a lot of issues that students have when they first come working into the website, and that is having these two files kind of in the same folder, making sure that you have a link tag with a hyperlink reference property that equals to the style sheet that you're trying to use, and then an rel equals style sheet to define that. And then once you do that, then you can add in some rules, and that's a good part about the colors, is really easily to see if you change the color or not. So if you ever have a question like, does this rule actually do anything? Change it to some bizarre color and see if it visually represents on the page. If not, it might not be a class you're using anymore, or it's misspelled, or something like that. So anyway, the validator looks to be pretty good with this one now, and we're kind of ready to move off on it. One of the other issues that a lot of students have starting out is kind of creating a zip file to turn into D2L. So it seems like some students like to try to compress their files directly, like each file individually. Instead, what I would want you to do is go back up to the folder above where you're storing it. Like if this was called KMP, your name, this is where you would want to right-click Send to Compressed Folder, and then give me that either in an email or a D2L in the D2L submission box. Kind of once you're done with it, once you've turned it in or whatever, you can delete this file, you don't need it anymore, and you just go back to your normal files here and start working on them. You can kind of think of this, the zip file as just being kind of like a snapshot of your code at that specific point in time in which you created it. It kind of treats it like one file, and then you can kind of move that folder, that one file, a lot easier than if you were moving all the other files individually. It's also needed because D2L is web-based, and if you try to upload your HTML document, D2L will effectively eat it and change it into a D2L format that it uses. So let's take a look at another one, sample 2, or sample 1. Sample 1 is actually the second sample. Indexes start at 0. So this is sample 2. We can open it up. We can see that the CSS, or some CSS, is applying to the page already. So let's go ahead and just try to drop that in the validator and see what's going on here. Why did I throw this one in the sample? And so we'll select that one from that folder and then open it up and do a check. And it seems like, yes, this one maybe has some other issues with it too. Again, don't maybe try to go all the way down the page and see how many of them are. Try to focus on the first one or few that are up at the top, and then work your way down. So line 7 seems to be where the issue starts here. Let's close some of these down so we don't get confused. One of the other things I would suggest is maybe don't use spaces in file names. So technically there's a space between lab 1 and lab 2. Typically your home page is called index. So you probably still want to call that index.html. And you still would want to be careful. For example, if you save this and then made another version, I would suggest trying to keep it real nice and clean. You can always just close things down in Notepad++. If you feel like you're getting lost, you have too many files open. Because a lot of times what will happen is if you have two folders, for example, in this folder they're index and style, in this folder they're index and style, it can sometimes get confusing between your different solutions. So this one's in the SAMP0 folder, SAMP0 folder, SAMP1, SAMP2. That gets a bit confusing, so feel free to kind of close everything down, reopen it in Notepad++, make sure you're in the right location. So again, we're kind of at line 7, so some sort of issue here, line 7, UTF-8. Looks like this is just misspelled. It's supposed to be UTF-8, not an equal sign. So we'll save that and check it again. Again, just kind of focusing on that top error. Line 15, center tag is not allowed as a child element of H1 in this context. You got to be careful here. The web's been around a long time. Long time. I guess 90s, early 90s is really when the web started kind of developing and taking off. The usage of the center tag here is old and deprecated, and what that means is basically it is obsolete. This is an instance with maybe like two errors together might give you a hint between the two. Center tag under HTML5 does not exist, and so it should not be used. The second error here is actually kind of telling you that, and gives you a link out about how to do a similar deal. So for example, we should just not have this tag in here at all. Center, just take it out. Bye-bye. Now, looking back at the page, the goal was to try to get Keith McDonald into the center. Oops. Oh, because I changed the file name. But now, it obviously is not. A different way to do this would be to just do class equals center as a CSS class, and then come over to your CSS file and add a class for that, dot center, and the property that you're looking for here is text align center. So you're going to kind of do the same thing without adding the extra HTML tag. For one reason, it kind of just simplifies what you got going on. You know, you don't have 3 tags nested inside of multiple ones. And kind of similar here, you got to span for blue. You know, what you could do is that if you kind of wanted things to all be centered, or it looks like you may have already had a class for that, move center. Move center, what you doing with this class? It's not even a class, it's an ID. So we'll probably encounter that error a little bit later on down here in this madness. So let's focus on just the center tag. We removed that from the top. We got it centered like we kind of wanted to. I guess what I was going for is that I don't really want to see these inline style equal attributes. For one reason, it just makes it harder to read your HTML, and can also kind of lead to some sloppy HTML. So if you really wanted that H1 tag to be blue, which seemed to be the only rule that you had on the page, in your CSS file you could write a simple rule for that, an H1 for H1 tags that you use, and then have that as color blue. That way you're kind of separating how it looks from kind of how it acts. So it's going to basically be the same, but now our HTML is a lot easier to read. Let's revalidate, work our way down the page. So we got rid of the center tag. We made some slight improvements to the CSS to kind of counter that. And then now we're kind of at line 28, and I think that's when I first started seeing this ID move center. Typically you use an ID when you want to identify it as like this is one thing, and so really this move center should be a class instead. So if you wanted to kind of keep that intact, what you would do is just change that to a period instead of a hashtag. Hashtags are for IDs, periods are for classes, and then just change these IDs to be classes. You're basically accomplishing the same thing, but classes are made to be used more than once, and IDs are made to be used only once. And that's basically the big difference. So if you really wanted all these guys to be that property, you would need to go through and change all of those IDs to match. There's probably a better way to write a CSS rule to accomplish the same thing, but for brevity of the video, we'll just kind of look and see that the document looks pretty good. And if we wanted to get rid of that last warning, we could add the language attribute up here to the top. And that should get us back to a kind of a green state there. And off to the races. Looks like we got some black text on black down here that might need to be in a paragraph or have some colors changed to it. Oh, right. This one would also need to be changed to a period. That would probably get the rule back the way you want. So keep tinkering with that one. Looking pretty good though, just trying to help you get that one back on track. Walk through the validator. Sample 2, HTML page.html. Kind of looking pretty good here. Probably just need to throw it in the validator and take a look at it. You might want to name your homepage index.html, since that's sort of the default for a homepage's name. And we'll open that up and take a check. So it does look like maybe we got some issues in the validator here. Title must not be empty, wrapper tag. So we'll start at line 5 and see what's going on. So we'll open those up, make sure we close down any of the other ones. Looks like at line 5 we have a title tag. Just need to put something in it, your name, the lab, whatever Keith McDonald Plumbing would probably make sense there too. So it can't be empty. The error message kind of eluded that to us. We could go ahead and revalidate here, but I think this one at line 9 is going to be pretty close. And Sol, left-hand side, expecting tribute name, missing greater than sign immediately before. So line 9, we see the body tag, but it's not actually the body tag's problem. It's that the tag above it, this div class equals wrapper, is missing its greater than sign to close it. So it technically wasn't closed. It was trying to make this as a property of that. And it's kind of weird that that issue starts arising. So we'll check it again, see what's going on here. And we're still sort of at line 9. And start body tag, but seen an element of the same type that was already open. So there's really, kind of looking at the HTML here, there's really two major sections on our HTML document. We can think of the HTML as the root element there. The head and the body are the two elements that are supposed to be directly beneath it. So we technically have this div class equals wrapper on the wrong side. And it really should be inside of the body tag. And we probably want to check at the bottom too if this one was supposed to be the in wrapper. Comments can really help when you might have multiple div tags embedded in your page. So we'll move that one up a bit and get it in it. Now you might be asking yourself why this error message was maybe not that straightforward. Well, there's if you want to be super technical and get down into it, the HTML5 specification, the one that's common now, there is a section in here, and I might have to make this a little bigger so the menu pops up, on optional tags. So this is kind of what we're learning in the official sense. We're learning the structure of a document and kind of how it works, all the tags and stuff like that. What I'm looking for here is the optional tags. So we're going to do Control F and search on this web page for optional tags inside HTML syntax. And there's a lot of special cases in which some tags may not be required. Again, kind of going back to usually the HTML tag is the root tag, the head tag is the top section, body tag is immediately under HTML, head is right under HTML. Any visible contents in the body section, and then the head section contains page directives. But in certain circumstances, that's a good way to put it, a lot of the end tags or start tags might be omitted if you do things a certain way. So kind of going back to why does this error message kind of say that a body tag is open but is seen but element already open, is that the other way that we had it, the wrapper was optionally opening a body tag, omitted as empty, and we were kind of enacting this element to create one automatically. So that's why the error messages can sometimes be a bit cryptic. But now that we switched that into a more into the structured format, we should see that, wow, a bunch of error, a bunch of warnings, a bunch of things just disappeared, right? Now we're down to just one, line 51. So we're actually kind of pretty far down here. Sometimes you got to be careful. You don't want things to be too in depth. So it looks like we have an H4 tag. We're trying to put in an unordered list with 3 list items in it, and that's not really what we should be doing. I just want to repurpose these H4 tags because there is some text right above it that could probably be rendered as an H4, and then our bullet points right underneath it. It's going to probably change a little bit what it looks like down here. A little more spacing on that one. But if you wanted to add bold or something back to those, you could define a class equals bold and then go to your CSS sheet and do dot bold font weight bold, and then get those back to to the bolded state. So that's pretty good for sample 2. Wow, really, didn't think I'd chug through these a little bit faster for you. Hopefully try to keep this video kind of short. I know I have a lot of content in the course already. So we're looking at sample 3 now. We'll go ahead and just drop it in the validator before looking at it. We'll see that the validator is clean, and I did kind of open it up and we took a look at it. But what I think this one was kind of one of those gotcha moments. So we'll take a look at the code. Again, I'm starting to get confused which ones are which, so I'm going to close some down and then reopen them. So everything is pretty good. We got our class equals wrapper. We'll look at our wrapper tag, our CSS width 92, margin 0 auto, max width 973. That all looks pretty good. Then we have another margin setting, and then the black. So what we get is that it's not really, that container isn't centered in the browser. What happens is that element here, that CSS element, we kind of right click, inspect, and find this margin 25 pixels that's on that wrapper. It's actually resetting the margin 0 auto that's there. So I guess a couple ways that you can handle this, depending on how you wanted it to look, is that if you just change this one to be margin dash top, that way it only affects that top margin up here at the top. You'll get your center alignedness back to the page where it's kind of, in the middle, and then still kind of keep the margin at the top. When you use just margin, you're setting all four directions, top, bottom, left, and right. And in this case, margin, when we use two of those values, the first value is the top and the bottom, so margin 0 on the top, margin 0 on the bottom, and then the second number is left and right. So automatic margins to the left, automatic margins to the right. And auto is the kind of the key word there that center aligns it, because that lets the margin be flexible on the outside of this wrapper box. So another way that you could write this without kind of being a little more redundant, if you wanted to, is take off that one and then put your 25 pixels as the first value here. That way 25 pixels at the top and the bottom, and you still have your automatic margins on the left and right, and it'll essentially look the same, and you don't have that extra one. I might also suggest, if you're kind of new to CSS and HTML, that maybe you take your CSS and start trying to break it out on new lines like this. This can be really helpful to help you start reading these properties and studying them a little bit. In the discussion, someone noted about this is hard to take notes for. You could always kind of feel free to add comments in your page. Surrounds all the content. It's kind of a wrapping class. It's going to be their container of containers. Using comments in your code can help you keep track of that. So not just putting them there, but then also having them kind of enter closing tag areas. That can be very helpful too. So that cuts it pretty good for sample 3. Let's see, 4 and 5, I think, had some interesting things going on with them. So we'll look at part 3, or sample 4, rather. And then we'll take a look at it. First, we'll just run it in the validator, see what's up. So the HTML is actually clean. There just doesn't seem to be any errors here. Similar to the ones that I mentioned earlier, that typically your home page is named index.html by default. So it might be worth changing it to that one. And what seems like what happened here is that there's a styles.css.rtf file, rich text format. So this file has kind of double extensions on it. It might look like a CSS file because it's got .css in it, but really it's got another extension on the end of it, .rtf. And if we try to open that, we're actually going to kind of open up probably Microsoft Word or some sort of Office document format, and we'll see, well, here's sort of the code that's there. So this does look like CSS, it's just in the wrong place. It's not in the right file or right kind of file. So we'll just copy the text out of it. That way we can kind of recreate it anyway, and go to New and Text Document. We want to name it probably the same name, style.css. Now I'm kind of on a Windows system, and by default Windows will hide these extensions, and so if there's a video on the course homepage on how to enable and disable those, kind of along with the zip file. And so you just got to be careful sometimes that you don't get that double extension. You don't have it .html. That can happen sometimes. So if you ever kind of like trying to link together files and things don't seem to match, double check that you are calling the two files kind of what you expect them to be and how they're going to kind of talk to one another. So we created our style.css. I'm going to copy and paste the CSS that's in it. Let's look at the index.html and take a look at it. The validator came back clean, so it looked pretty good. But launching Chrome, no CSS is kind of applying to it at the moment. So up here in the head section, that's where we'll need to add our link href equals to pull in that file. So that's style.css rel equals style sheet. And once we have this link tag in our head page, and we're referring to the style.css file, which is just a plain text file, not this RTF file, or sometimes that can happen when you're making new files by accident. In Notepad++, if you're going to try and create a new file, and the extensions that give you a little bit of willingness, a lot of times you can just go to File and New, and then once you start trying to save this file somewhere, in the Save As Type dialog box, you can change that to be a Cascade Style Sheets.css file, or a it's in here somewhere. I think it's hypertext markup language file. You can kind of have a lot of different extensions for that. It should populate it there for you, and then you can just call it like index.html or index.html or whatever, or about if it's a different page. So just try to make sure your extensions and stuff are good. Kind of what we're going for there. Let's hit refresh, and looks like a lot of the styles are starting to apply to the page. So we got the body tag, the font size changed, the wrapper went into effect, and some of the other sections that we have. I don't think we were using a section tag in there. And when you use a color, you'll want to make sure you put that hashtag. Did we use a section tag? It's a little early in the assignments to use section. But we could throw it in down here at the bottom, section, kind of after this last paragraph, section. Indentation can be really helpful to kind of see where tags are embedded in other tags. And we do a refresh, maybe those styles will start applying to the bottom. So that one was pretty close. I think the biggest issue there was just being careful that you're working in the files that you think you are, and if you don't have the file extensions enabled, do check out that video about how to enable them in Windows or an operating system, or whichever one you're using. I think in Macs they show automatically. I don't think you need to change them in Mac. So we're on to the last sample, sample 5. And we'll just start by going into the validator. Did I check the right file last time? Oh, I guess I didn't. I was going to jump back to 4 and make sure. Actually, validator wasn't bad. I think we did do it. One of the warnings that was on there, I showed it real quick, but character encoding not declared. If you get that warning, it's more about having the right encoding type. In Notepad++, you can verify that by go to encode in UTF-8, which looks like it came up as that by default. And then you can add a meta tag up here at the top, charset equals UTF-8, to kind of force it to know that it's using the right language. Section lacks heading is down at the bottom, line 47. Technically a warning, but we should have some sort of heading tag in here. So even if we use like an H3 here instead of a paragraph, then technically we don't need the strong tag, because an H3 tag is bolded by default. And that should kind of clear up that last error for us. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I think that one, the biggest issue there was just having the right file. Let's see, we'll go on to the last one now, close this down, and we're in sample 5, so we'll do a check on sample 5 and see where we're at. And looks like we got some bugs that we need to work out first. Line 6, bad value for style sheet. Looks like maybe we have a misspelling here, so style looks like it's misspelled. Try not to overlook the little things is my suggestion here. It can be sometimes easy when you're staring at this wall of code to just overlook some little tiny thing that's going to drive you nuts. So line 6, we just need to make sure that we spell style sheet correctly. Move that L over there to the right side, and hopefully that'll fix our first error there. Going down the list, line 22 seem to have some sort of issue. H1 tag not allowed as child element. And that's because we are trying to use a heading tag inside of an unordered list. So, and then kind of closing the unordered list here. So if we wanted this to be inside or be a bulleted item, we would need to use an li tag instead of a heading tag. And then this extra text that's kind of floating in here as well, we would need to take that out, or at least include that in some sort of list item as well. A UL, an unordered list, is a structure of list items, li tags. I think in the video I used a list structure on this content here. In the browser we're going to kind of see that, we haven't looked at this one in the browser yet, have we? Let's run it. So this information is kind of just stacked together. Those were our 2 bullet points that we just put in. It probably would be helpful to break this out, make it a little bit easier to read for our users. We'll take another look at the validator, work our way down the list, and see what else we encounter. Looks like at line 45, n tag p implied, but there were open elements. So line 45, let's go take a look. There is an opening p tag, a strong tag, and a closing strong tag. And it looks like the p tag is never closed. So maybe we need to close that somewhere, p tag. And then unclosed element span, well, that's just validated there. Yeah, I think we got something weird here. This might be one of the few cases in which I would say the line numbers, generally as long as you're moving upwards in line numbers, you're in a good spot. But for example, this one, it looks like it might be tied back to line 41, where we have this span tag. So maybe we didn't have a closing p tag, but it doesn't look like we had a closing span tag up above it. And so this one needs to be closed somewhere. I guess that means what's occurring is this span being or p trying to be in this span is causing a bug. That's why it's like tripping at 45 first, but then going back to 41, kind of like a cascading error kind of deal. So we'll check this one real quick and see where we're at, and looks like we're pretty close. We just need to add that lang equals en up here to the HTML tag. That'll help us make sure that it knows that we're trying to use English, and it looks pretty good. And then we got it going. It doesn't look like we have any CSS rolling yet, so we'll take a look at it real quick and look at the CSS file. And one of the things that kind of jumps out to me is that everything sort of looks like a comment. And again, little tiny syntax things can sometimes throw you off. So a CSS comment begins with a /* and then closes with a */. So that asterisk really kind of needs to be on the other side. And then this is all in comments just to kind of help you keep track of what colors you want to use. And then these would be your actual rules where you're going to affect the page. So we'll save it and do a refresh and see if we get any results here. And it doesn't seem that we made any difference here. So it could be that we're not using .class and .name. So we could go back and look and see, are we trying to use, yeah, there's a class name there. So we should have seen something happen. You might want to double check. Again, you always got to be kind of careful. One little misspelling or keystroke or something like that can really throw you off. So we have index.html as our home page, and then style.css is our CSS file. Style.css, it's here. The CSS file is going to apply through the link tag, so we'll check our link tag and take a look at it. And before we had style sheet misspelled, but it looks like we actually have an extra S here. So it has to match exactly. Style.css is that file, so we have to make sure it matches style.css. And hopefully what we'll see is that something worked here. Let's go back and look. Style.css seems to be a syntax error here as well. You can kind of see Notepad++. It's not bolded. It's not out like it was before. Let's see. Class.name color. Well, okay. One of the things I see just starting out is that this should have a colon in between. So CSS properties are a period for a class, opening left curly brace, followed by a property, and then the value that you want to set to that property. That's kind of a, the one attribute. You're setting an attribute, a property with a property value. Those attributes are separated by semicolons. And so you can have multiple properties kind of applying to one tag. So there was a syntax error there. Just like HTML, CSS also exhibits kind of like a top-down issue. So if you have an error kind of high up in your CSS file, it can sometimes have an effect on stuff that's below it. The other thing that I see here is that font is not for value of bold. We're looking for font weight property, not the font property. So those are different CSS properties that you can set with different values. Font weight is, if we wanted to bold .name, that's what we would want to try to set. We'd want to set a bold color. I'm not sure what color 00 triple F or quadruple F is, but if it's a valid color, we should see that change as well. We did see that the bold worked. So there was our statement over here, span.name. And maybe it doesn't look like that's a valid color. Again, kind of in the validator, if you're inspecting an element and you kind of want to know why it's not working, you could kind of look over here in the inspect tool over to the CSS property and kind of hover over it and see unknown property name. So there is some sort of issue here, and it looks like what happened is that there's no colon to separate the property that you want to set with the value you're trying to set it to. So we'll do a refresh of that, and now we can see that it turns to a bright cyan-like color. Again, this can sometimes be difficult to read if you're first starting out in writing HTML and CSS. So what I might suggest doing is breaking these out onto multiple lines. That way you can get kind of a better view of the different properties, what values you're trying to set with them, and then ultimately kind of like what you want to do with it. So hopefully this helps give you a good idea into the validator, how to debug some code, how to get around some of the first kind of errors that start, that a lot of students start out with having a lot of errors at the beginning. Hopefully this kind of walks through that. What I might also suggest doing, and I'm probably the only professor that's going to encourage you to go out and look for cheat sheets for things. So HTML5 cheat sheet off of Google. You're going to probably have to make it really big or store it as a PDF file or something. But it shows a lot of the different tags and properties that are pretty common with a lot of different tags that we use. So good resource to kind of start looking for different things. Also, a CSS3 cheat sheet would be a good thing to look up as well. A good one. This is probably the go-to since when I first started leading of it. I guess it's been inside of here somewhere. But all kinds of cheat sheets that you can use to kind of check out and do whatever. I'm never going to get to it, am I? I think I have those posted in the course too, like the good ones that I really like. Let's see, Riley Media. Come on, give me a good one. Oh, silly people. Fix your links to things. Keep your websites running. It's a good one. You know, border width, border dash radius, max depth wish, background dash clip if you're really trying to use like background images, background attachment, background in general. Lots of different CSS properties do things. Anyway, this video probably went 15 minutes longer than I expected it to, but hopefully found it useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Have a good one. Bye.